Okay. Anywho, so those cases of guys that may have incompatibles, or maybe they are protective cases, inmates who feel more comfortable in segregation or voluntarily in segregation or refusing to come out. So those are the cases that we've oftentimes struggled to get out of segregation. So what we did was, when a guy had been in for about 120 days with no plan to alleviate, we bumped those cases up to the national level and reviewed those. And we had the committee that previously was managed by the Director General here in Security, and then all of the assistant commissioners of in the regions. Sorry, the names of their acronym changes all the time, so I'm at a loss. I think it's an Assistant Commissioner of Correctional Operations. They would sit in on a call, and we'd go over every case and trying to push to get these guys out and to try and find an alternative for them. And sometimes we would have cases where it would be an inmate who has been around to lots of sites, and basically, it's very difficult for him to integrate. So sites are reluctant to take him again because they know he's just going to go right back into segregation, because that's where his comfort level is. So we would push the regions to resolve these cases. Sometimes it was also difficult to move guys because of our flights. So we would have flights. Previously, we would have them every couple of months. So we're only able to move X amount of inmates at a time on our flights. So sometimes it would be a matter of jockeying for position on these flights. And so we decided to change our policy so that somebody in segregation would get kind of first dibs on a seat to get to another region. So that's what the long-term Seg Review Committee did. It really moved cases that otherwise were stuck. So we've now bumped that up to the level of the Senior Deputy Commissioner. So, and she's now going to be reviewing those at 60 days, as opposed to before, historically, when we did it for a lot longer. So what that means for us is that our very highest level of the organization is going to know all of those longer-term segregation cases. So it puts more of an emphasis on it, or more of a pressure on the institutions to resolve these cases as quickly as possible. The other thing that we've introduced, and it's a review of inmates who have been placed in segregation 4 times or more in a year. And it doesn't matter the length of time that they're in segregation, it's the fact that they're going in repeatedly. And that kind of comes from, back from Ashley Smith. You'll recall she had been in segregation a number of times, and we're wanting to look, when we start to see somebody that's in and out of segregation, sometimes there's another story behind that, and this is going to prompt us to look at that story. Why is it that these folks are going into segregation so many times? So the SDC will be looking at every case of an inmate who within the year has gone in more than 4 times. The next part of that is if they've, and it kind of is the same thing, if cumulative they've had more than 90 days, we will be looking at those cases as well. Rather, the SDC will be looking at those cases. So that's a big shift for us, that the Senior Deputy Commissioner will be involved in that review. We haven't got down to what that review is going to look like at this point, but as you know, we have some other review committees. For example, our Special Handling Unit, we have a National Advisory Committee, we have a whole review structure we do for that. So we have some experience in doing these rather high-level reviews, so we're currently working on a plan to what that would look like. The next thing that's, I think, important, or the next change, is the fact that our Assistant Commissioner of Correctional Operations and Programs, who currently Fraser McCauley, he is now responsible for every time that we have an incident of non-compliance. so for our segregation, he is actually now responsible and accountable to reporting that to our commissioner. That's a huge change for us, because, we've got to drill down to see exactly what that looks like, but that can be everything from an offender not being offered their shower on a daily basis, or not being provided yard, or not getting their personal effects. So, and if they haven't received those things because we just didn't comply with their policy, not if there was an operational issue, but more we just haven't followed our policy. So that's a big thing that the Assistant Commissioner will be reporting. At the same time, the Regional Deputy Commissioner of the region where that non-compliance has taken place, he also has to, he or she is accountable for reporting to the Commissioner for any of those areas of non-compliance. So this means that really, again, at the highest of levels, they're going to know exactly what is happening in our segregation unit, down to the, kind of very granular level. They're going to be aware of that. So those are kind of two of the quite big things that that have taken place. The other one there's a couple more that are very important, and the next one is an inadmissibility criteria. So that's where CSC is now saying there are certain inmates who we're not going to be putting in segregation. We are not allowed to use segregation as a means of managing a risk that may be posed by them or to them. So those inmates are inmates that have a serious mental disorder that are significantly impaired. Now, I'm not going to be able to speak to, from a clinical perspective, that's not my expertise, but certainly we have a definition of what that would be. And so it's, those folks that are presenting with symptoms associated with psychotic, major depressive, and bipolar disorders, resulting in a significant impairment in functioning. So we'll be working very closely, obviously, with our mental health folks to identify who these inmates are. But when we have them, we will be looking at alternatives to segregation for them. The other ones are inmates that are an imminent risk to self-injury. So they would be managed under CD 843, which is our health directive. Pregnant women, and inmates with significant mobility impairments. So those are folks that we are not going to be, they're identified as vulnerable offenders, and they will not be put into segregation. So we're going to work our way through that from an operational perspective to, we have to have alternatives for these folks. And certainly for the mental health, as you know, we have units in our maximum security and medium security institutions, so that's where we would be looking to house those folks. We've then done some minor changes in terms of responsibilities with our Assistant Warden of Operations, the AWO. They become responsible for the daily operations of that unit, as well as the conditions of confinement within that, and making sure that any of the information that is required for segregation, so example, filling out the proper log forms, ensuring that the inmate has received his showers, received his personal effects, etc. So making sure that that's all taken care of. Then we've tasked the Assistant Warden of Interventions also to be responsible for, from the case management side of it, to make sure that interventions are there, the services are there, so that services being, the chaplain, the elder, psychology, social workers, behavioral scientists, all of those folks that come in to segregation to assist our inmates. So they're going to be responsible for making sure that that happens. Then the next thing that has changed, I'm sorry I'm rushing here, but I'm cognizant of time and I do want some time for discussion. The next thing that has changed is the conditions of confinement. And this is one where there were some monies that came down for us in order to facilitate some of these conditions of confinement. So one of them is that the personal property and essential items will go to the inmate immediately. So as soon as he or she is placed in segregation, there are the immediate effects that come with them. So that's their hygiene products, it could be their spiritual products, it could be letters, that kind of thing. And then within 24 hours, the remainder of their personal effects come down to segregation. Of course, there is the caveat at the warden's discretion, because as you would probably know, in some segregation units, we can have restrictions on what's allowed in. Can use as an example, in some institutions, certainly at the maximum security level, where we've been challenged with inmates using containers to throw bodily fluids at staff, we've had to restrict the size of containers. So if an inmate had a liter bottle of shampoo, as an example, in their cell effects, they're not necessarily going to be getting that liter bottle of shampoo down in segregation. They'll get a smaller amount of shampoo, and that would just be filled up again. So some places we may restrict, size of containers. But again, anything that's being restricted has to be documented and in advance. So it's not as an inmate comes down and we just say, yes, you can have this, or no, you can't have that. We have to have had that organized well in advance, so any inmate coming to segregation knows what they're allowed to bring. We've also included daily showers. In many of our sites, that was taking place anyway, but now we ensure that the showers are on a daily basis. And then the next significant change for us is the amount of time, the minimum amount of time that an inmate will be out of his or her cell, and that's 2 hours. And that includes the time out for their shower. But this 2 hours, this minimum 2 hours, will give them that opportunity for their yard, for interventions, for meaningful human contact, which is really kind of what that is trying to address. So that's kind of the big parts that have changed, of course, except for at the very end. Of course, we have the Citizens Advisory Committee yourselves, where we are putting right into policy the role that we want the CAC to play. And I know certainly from my experience, I was the warden out at Atlantic Institution for a bit and had my CAC coming down to segregation. It was not something they were used to doing, but we felt that it was pretty important. So now what we've put right in our policy is that the CAC members would have access to admin-seg, and I do think that happens in a number of places, but also reporting back to the institutional head, to the warden, on observations and concerns. It's critical for us because as a warden, you can go down to segregation every day to do your review, but you can sometimes be a little bit blind to what's happening in segregation because they're so used to it. So to have the fresh eyes of the CAC for us is a great thing. So we're very, very happy to see that in policy. And also allowing for the CAC members to sit in on the review board. So that would be something that I know that the wardens would actually many wardens will welcome having a CAC member sit in on the SEG review boards. So that's kind of in a very high-level, quick overview of some of the major changes that we've put out there. Now, you also know that this was a very short turnaround in terms of consultation. I mean, 10 days is what we had put out. So yesterday was the closing date of the consultations for us to receive comments back. The commissioner would like to have this basically done and dusted kind of this month in June. So this is a bit of the rush to make sure that we hear from folks and get the comments back so that we can take those under consideration. We certainly know that there are some things that there's not going to be movement on, and that's the exclusions. The Commissioner is quite adamant that there are certain inmates that he's not going to see in segregation. And we see that in other jurisdictions as well, where they've started to restrict certain offenders from going into segregation. Certainly for us in the field operationally, it's going to be something for us to get used to. It's going to be a cultural shift, but one that if we can get the right resources in the right place, I think we should be able to do that. So without going any further, Lori, maybe I could just open it up if folks have any questions. And then just for clarification, I want to make sure, you had said that you guys will be sending us your comments afterwards in written form, correct?
Correct.
Excellent.
Yep. So any comments that come out of this teleconference, the subsequent French call that is immediately following, and any written comments that have been submitted to regional chairs or to myself personally, we get those rolled up and send them along to you. So we'll do that expeditiously to make sure that they can be included. So thank you for that great overview, Lee. That was wonderful. I think what you said at the beginning is there's been a major shift in practice, and it's evident in the high points that you've expressed, as well as in the policy. But let's open it up to folks. Please identify yourself by name and tell us where you're from, and then a comment or question is most welcome.
Charlie Burbank, Joyceville Institution. I noticed in the exclusions that there's no mention of youth. I think Howard Sapers had recommended that people under 21 or some other young age not be admitted to admin seg. Is there any consideration being given to that?
It wasn't something that was brought forward at all for us. I would probably say no. I mean, I wouldn't stop you from putting that as a comment at all. It's not something that was talked about and dismissed. It simply wasn't, as far as I know, something that we looked at.
Okay, we'll certainly mention that. Thanks.
Hey, nobody else is going to talk. Charlie Burbank, Joyceville again. CAC members sitting in on SEG review boards. I do this every week, sometimes twice a week. I just want to clarify what our position and responsibilities are. Are we there strictly as observers, or are we given the opportunity to speak at any point?
What we're looking at is observers. Kind of as your role as a CAC person, you're ensuring that that the inmate is provided, the procedural fairness is there. But really, it's as an observer, you'll have obviously you have, I'm sure you take advantage of that to come back to the institutional head if they're not sitting in on that board to comment how it's rolling out. But we're really seeing you as a bit of our eyes and our ears from a community perspective. So yeah, at this point we're looking at that just as the observer role.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because we're often introduced as members of the board, and technically we're not members of the board, we're just observers. So maybe that clarification could be made when we're being introduced to the offenders.
It's Caroline Raymond calling, or speaking from the Warden of Matsqui. I do have a question, because I think what you just raised was a good one. Whenever a CAC member sits in on any board here at my institution, I always I introduce them to the offender, whatever way they feel most comfortable, usually just first name or whatever, and their role. And then I give the offender the option for them to remain or not, because I think there's privacy issues there. Now, most all offenders say, oh, no, I have no concern. But have we looked at that?
I can't speak to that, but it's certainly something that we'll check out. But certainly, Caroline, you're right. When we're bringing people in, even as observers, for segregation, for the special handling unit, as an example, we always indicate to the offender that somebody's here as an observer. Do they have any concerns? but that's something that we'll clarify. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Oh, hi, Lori. This is Deirdre. I'm driving. I'm on Bluetooth, so if I'm cutting in and out, it's only because of that. I apologize if this has already been clarified. I didn't get a chance to read carefully. Now that we are included at CAC in the ways that we are in policy, do we have some legal liability if there are incidents? If, for example, we had been aware of something even though we had communicated, but then there's an incident, what's our liability is what I'm sort of asking.
So just try and give me thinking of an example. So you're saying if you're sitting in the SEG review and you see something illegal happening, what would your liability be if you didn't do anything? Or basically, whenever you're seeing something, your obligation is to come back to the warden and advise of what you've seen. It may be a misconduct or whatever, but you would certainly, the expectation is that you're coming and reporting that to the warden. But if you're witnessing things that are contrary to policy or to our code of conduct, et cetera, and you're not saying something, it's not so much as a liability. If you were seeing something illegal, obviously that would be different, but the expectation is that you would be coming in and letting the warden know about it. Is that kind of what you were talking about, or you were talking more illegal acts?
Well, I think you've mostly captured it. I just wonder whether we would we be needing to put things in writing with the warden so that the warden had a written record of our observation, or will we just informally have a conversation with our warden and say, here are some things that concerned me, or here were things I had questions about? How would you advise for us on that?
I mean, certainly when we're doing our CAC meetings, we have minutes of them. I mean, I think that I would probably leave that up to you, what your comfort level is. We all go into meetings, and some of us feel more comfortable to do a follow-up to say, as per our conversation, here's what we discussed. But I don't think it would be for CAC to start to tell you that you have to submit written documentation, but certainly if you feel more comfortable with that, then that's certainly your prerogative. But again, I can just get some further clarification on that.
Yeah. But Leah, it's Lori, I would just support what you said, is that our CAC minutes are an important part of our record keeping as to what observations we raised, and it is up to your own comfort level whether you choose to verbally address things with the warden and or in writing. But as long as it's also recorded in our minutes that this is the kind of observations that were put forward and CAC members were in attendance at such and such meeting, that's a great way for us to do that. But again, yeah, we'll follow up as well. Deirdre, thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Lori.
Other questions, comments? Lee, I had a couple of things. I really like the inclusion now of having health service providers and mental health practitioners as part of this entire process. And there was one in paragraph 20, it had me a little concerned that if an inmate is admitted to administrative segregation outside of regular health service hours, the stipulation is only that within 24 hours a health professional would see this individual. I think that's a little too long for justification. So if it's outside of business hours, I would think that we would be able to have a health professional visit segregation and address any health concerns perhaps within the 12-hour period. So, I mean, this is just something to be more proactive and keep the timelines really tight. One of the other questions I had was around, and I think it came out of the Ashley Smith recommendations in paragraph 22, where it was talking about the whole notion of being re-entering segregation. Here it states that there would be a bit of a review if it's for the same reason or incident. but I'm not sure that that's fully justifiable if we look at, there might be a whole bunch of different reasons that individuals get assigned to administrative segregation, but I think if we put that stringent must be for the same reason, we might not be honoring the whole jury recommendations around continuous or multiple intakes into segregation. So just those were just a couple of observations.
Okay, that's great. We'll talk to healthcare about number 20. Actually, it seems to me that we had conversation with them, but we'll certainly raise that again, as well as 22. I mean, you know, that it's been the 22. It's a tough one. You know, the continuous, and Carol Ann I'm sure can attest to it. Just can be a nightmare to administer, but the continuous segregation, when it should stop and when it should start. But we'll certainly look at that through the lens of the jury recommendation to make sure that we are kind of meeting the spirit and intent of it.
Thanks. Okay. And I'll just thank you very much for having CAC explicitly added to this policy. I know the Commissioner has been challenging us for the past couple of years to make sure that we are more attentive within segregation, but quite frankly, opening up the doors even further now by having this in policy and encouraged is very welcome. So thank you.
Great.
Other observations, comments, anything about, now, Charlie, you talked about your experience in going to a review board process. Are there other members of CAC who have attended, like visited segregation or attended and observed at review boards? You'd like to talk about your experience and observations?
Yes, Charlie again from Joyceville. At Joyceville assessment unit, well, Joyceville is clustered, of course, minimum and assessment unit, but there's only one segregation unit. That's on the assessment unit side, which used to be the medium side. Anybody from minimum that's required to go to seg goes across the road into the assessment unit seg. Review boards are held every Monday and Thursday at 9:30 in the morning. We have one long-term member of our CAC board who religiously attends the Thursday morning one, unless she's on vacation or traveling, doing something else. So she's pretty good. I try to get to the Monday one and Thursday one when I can. However, I'm not always available, so we miss some of them. But I'd say we probably hit, you know, maybe 60 to 70% of those on a long-term basis. So CAC is well represented there. They know we're there, and you know, we're introduced every time, and so we've been doing this a long time down here. We just as a reflection of this proposed policy. So what else did you want to know, Lori?
That was it. I think that's sufficient. If there's anything that really speaks, like if there's something that you want to comment about what you've noticed in the review process or something like that, feel free.
I guess the only thing I find sort of lacking from my point of view is that, and you know, this may not be possible anyway, that we do not have any background on these people before they come before the Seg Review Board. All we have is a list of names, whereas obviously other people, the parole officer, mental health people, deputy warden, who are, you know, the people involved in the actual board, have reviewed this person's file, and they know a lot about it. So assumptions are made, and they start talking about things, and we as CAC are not aware of the background. And I find it frustrating, but I don't know from a policy point of view if there's anything else that could be done about that. Occasionally, you know, if I get so frustrated, I ask for an interpretation. Well, you know, what was this guy's crime, or what's he in here for, or something like that. But other than that, I find the system is working pretty well. I think the rules are being followed. At the end of each appearance before the Seg Review Board, the secretary, who's the MAI at Seg, always asks the question, are you getting showers, access to the yard? But there's some other questions that aren't asked all the time, and I feel should be asked all the time. One of which is, they always ask about health and mental health, but the ones they don't ask all the time are access to chaplaincy or elder, and are you aware that you can see the inmate committee if you want? The inmate committee is now allowed down to SEG every Wednesday afternoon. That's something that we fought for and got, and I think it's good because these people sometimes need to talk to somebody in their peer group. You know, they'd rather unburden to them than they would to us or to staff. That's my comment.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions or experience they'd like to talk about?
This is Greg at Dorchester.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to make a couple comments. One of the line items on our monthly meeting is segregation and any problems in segregation. We also attend the review of our inmates that are in segregation with the committees, and we also have an open invitation to tour segregation whenever we want to go down there. One of the things that we're dealing with in Dorchester right now is we're having a transfer of quite a few inmates from Quebec that are coming to Dorchester, and that is driving up our numbers in segregation. Our warden takes quite a bit of pride in keeping the numbers fairly low, and I know she was a bit upset at the last meeting because the numbers have crept up, but it's because of these inmates that are coming in and the problems they're having transferring other inmates to Spring Hill to make room in Dorchester for these inmates. But overall, our warden is very conscious of having an oversight in and around segregation so that we can discuss with senior management and with the inmate committee anything that can help with segregation. So things are going fairly well, but we are dealing with this little problem with the inmates coming from Quebec.
Terrific. Well, that speaks to what Lee was talking about earlier, the dynamic nature of the numbers. Plus, I really like the idea that you've integrated SEG as a line item as a standing agenda item. I think that's a tip for practice we'll share with all our other institutional CACs. I think that's fantastic. Thanks, Greg.
Okay.
Great. Anybody else?
Lori, it's Lee. I just wanted to comment a couple of the things that I think it was Charlie from Joyceville had mentioned.
Yeah.
I would be very cautious, and I wouldn't be supportive of us sharing inmate files with CAC members. Certainly that's up to the inmate if, he or she wants to give access, but as a rule, that's not something that I don't think it's your role. It's a kind of an eyes and an ears and making sure that from a procedural fairness that we're doing everything we should do. But if you start getting into the weeds of a particular offender's case, I think that could start to blur lines for you. So I would just caution you on that. The second part was about, we do have a checklist for the SEG review boards, and so you're saying if there's certain things that they're not mentioning, like, have you seen the healthcare, have you seen this person or that person, but if there's the key ones, be the elder or chaplain, whatnot, so I'm going to make a note and make sure that in our checklist that, we don't wardens or a person running the SEG review board they don't have to follow this checklist, but I know a lot just like to have a checklist to make sure that they cover everything. But I'll just make sure that those key people are included in the kind of those things that we want to ask the inmate just as a kind of standard procedure.
Yeah, Charlie here. Sometimes the question gets asked. All I'm saying is that sometimes it doesn't, and I think it should be universally asked if you need to. If you want to see the chaplain or whatever. Yep. And as far as sharing of files, yes, I didn't think it was going to be possible. I'm not sure that I want to see it anyway. So.
2 follow-up questions to that, Lee. Is that checklist, is it universal across all CSC institutions, or is that something that is developed at a regional or local level?
It's Carol Ann here. I can answer that. It's every checklist is for every warden, and every warden is obligated to follow it. It's not all wardens managing it, by the way. In our region, it's delegated to the deputy wardens. But either way, there's a checklist, and those questions need to be asked in each and every SEG review.
Okay. And is that something that we can circulate to our CAC members?
I don't see why not. It's a CD. Okay. Part of our current CD, which is about to change, but I'm sure it will remain.
Again, as a tool for us to have a better appreciation for what gets covered, and it helps us in our observation ability. So I think if that's possible, I can follow up for sure and get confirmation if we can circulate that, but I think that would be useful. My second question, Lee, is about the reporting. Because the minister's letters now pay specific attention to solitary confinement or whatever we want to call it, have the reporting requirements for CSC changed in any way in terms of what you need to provide to the minister?
No, no, they haven't at this point. We haven't seen anything that's come out in terms of reporting. I mean, obviously the commissioner reports back on any number of items to the minister and kind of the hot topics, and certainly segregation is one right now, but in terms of kind of a formal reporting, no, I haven't seen anything change. Lori, just to go back though to the guidelines or the checklists, just so you know that, so they are we have the segregation assessment tool, which is part of the CD, which is publicly available. And in that, the assessment tool, it says of all of the things that the inmate is supposed to, that we're supposed to be asking, and that the inmate's supposed to receive, he or she, when they go into segregation. And then in the guidelines as well, we provide some guidance to how a segregation review board should be run. And we almost have a narrative in there as well about how it should be run. But certainly, have a look at that, and certainly all wardens have that, and as Carol Ann says, we pretty much all use it. I mean, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If policy says here's what you need to ask, and if there's a checklist, just follow it. That way you don't miss anything.
Right, right. Okay, I'm aware of our time, so is there any final comment? All right, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
No, just saying no, that's it.
Oh, okay, well, great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Lee, very much for walking us through this. Adrienne, we're glad we didn't have to bombard you with too many questions or barbs or anything like that, because I think overall, personally, I'm very impressed with the changes that have been made in the policy. I think this is a much stronger stance on behalf of CSC. We appreciate immensely being included now in this policy and always invited into this process. Thanks, everybody, for taking time out of your day to be here. I think this is an important topic. We'll see about some follow-up to this as well, just to keep ourselves involved and engaged in this important topic. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.